Ken Russell's stormy 1971 British horror film The Devils is partially based on Aldous Huxley's 1952 novel. Mark Kermode referred to the film as a dark 70s masterpiece with extraordinary set design.
With its heavy mixture of sex and religion, The Devils is one of the most controversial films ever produced. However, Warner Brothers ruthlessly edited it in an attempt to stifle the backlash. One of the scenes that was cut from it was a scene commonly known as the Rape of Christ, and Ken Russell said about this cut, "They killed the key scene in the movie, it was glorious stuff." I recently spoke to Isha Sahota, who's directing the King's Players production of The Devils.
I guess the two main things I get from the film, firstly, is I think Ken Russell really emphasised the violence and the brutality and the sexual violence of the script content. I think that's really important for the meaning of the play. Second thing is that he really did it in a very stylised, abstract way, which really inspired us and the creative team and the production team to do something that was a bit off the wall and not really like a straight historical piece, but something a bit more abstract. The really scary thing about the film is the psychological element of terror that it really portrays, because there's this huge sense of injustice and meaninglessness with this violence, which is the really scary thing.
In an extraordinary move, both Warner Brothers and the US Censorship Board cut the film extensively. At the time, Vincent Canby wrote in the New York Times that the movie is composed of a lot of clanking, silly, melodramatic effects that, like rib tickling, exhaust you without providing particular pleasure, to say nothing of enlightenment. I spoke to King's Film Studies lecturer Catherine Wheatley about the impact of the film. Thank you for talking to us, Catherine. Do you think that the film addresses religion in a responsible manner?
Absolutely not. I think one of the things that's interesting about The Devils is that Russell is to a certain extent trying to make a comment about the degradation of religion, and he has a Catholic background of his own, so there's a certain ambivalence around that. But I'm not sure if religion is the central focus of the critique that's being made within the film, rather that it's a comment on politics and human nature, which uses religious iconography in an incredibly iconoclastic manner to make its points.
Derek Jarman attended King's University from 1960 to 1963 to study English, history and art. His break in the film industry came with The Devils, where he was production designer.
2 days after his death in 1994, The Independent wrote that Derek Jarman's death robs British cinema of its most vital force. For 20 years, Jarman has been a constantly innovative figure, breaking with the conservatism of every aspect of cinematic practice to produce works which have been technically original, aesthetically radical, and constitute an astonishing personal and public record of England in the last quarter of the 20th century. How do you think the set contributes to the dystopian aims of the film?
I think it's incredibly important. And there's a sense in which the kind of white brick and very sort of austere, sanitised surfaces of the sets create an almost timeless feel to the film, at the same time as it seems to be, very much rooted in the pomp of that particular era. And I think there's a quote from Huxley in the novel, from which The Devils is adapted, where he says that the rape of Sister Jeanne is equivalent, the exorcism of Sister Jeanne is equivalent to being raped in a public lavatory. And we see that in those sets, and I think that public lavatory sanitisation of that bleached out dystopia that we see is very clear.
I really wanted to avoid the historical straight kind of adaptation of this piece, and what Derek Jarman did was make the production design so almost like dystopian and kind of futuristic, because in 1634 these walls were real, were new and real.
Were you scared by the film at all?
I'm not so much sure scared is the right word as discomforted. I think there's something in that postmodern setup combined with the historical aspects, and it's still very shocking to see things like the desecration of Christ and the final scene in which she masturbates with a charred femur bone, I think it is. But it's also, there's something quite slippery and quite discomforting about the way that it's quite hard to get to grips with The Devils, I think, because it doesn't quite situate itself in any one time or any one framework. And the very, very final sequence where we see this one character sort of strolling off into this absolute no man's land, surrounded by these kind of wheeling bodies of dead Protestants, is incredibly bleak and a very, very unsettling way to finish the film. I think it's something that stays with you in some ways more than the blood and guts and the more gruesome stuff that we see happening earlier on in parts of the film.
I want people to be moved, really. That's the most important thing. That's the thing that in all drama that you want people to actually feel something.
It's a dark film which remains hugely controversial.
Whether or not the play can be as controversial as the film is still an open question.